One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode.
So the whole COVID-19 has really been interesting, right? Like that's the proper word that we should use to describe it. I've often, like you've heard me asking my guests recently, it's like, hey, give me a word to describe how you're feeling during this time. And it's funny because one word that I would use today is interesting, but the other one at this exact moment I want to talk about is nostalgic. Okay, bear with me for a second, because obviously I've never lived through a pandemic and all the things that, come with it that we've all had to get adjusted to. But you guys, I'm sitting on the floor in my closet recording on my $20 microphone today. So that's where the nostalgia plays into today's episode. And I just wanted to bring that up for everybody that's listening, is sometimes you just got to go back to your roots, right? Especially when the kids are being super loud and you don't have your normal setup, like it's not accessible at the moment, but you got to do what you got to do. So we're just keeping it real here. So I wanted to make note of that before we really dove into all the things that we're going to cover today, because today I want to talk about having more than one podcast. Because I have more than one podcast now, and I have for a little over a month, and I just want to pull back the curtain and tell you some of the reasons why I chose to do my second podcast, what it's looked like, and just give you some more information if you are thinking about starting another podcast or why in the world I did it in the first place. So let's get right to it.
Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we?
So like I said at the very beginning, I'm recording in my closet right now. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, like a while, right? You know that I used to always complain about my laundry. And things haven't changed. And it's funny because I don't complain about laundry that much on the podcast anymore. And I just realized it's because I'm not in my closet when I'm recording, which is where I hide all of my laundry, right? Like okay, hang on, let me count them. There are 4 baskets full of clothes. Granted, they are all clean, kind of folded. I would go with 70% of them are folded. They literally just need to be put away. But yet we sit here and I'm faced with the fact that I have not put these away. So anyway, I just wanted to give a little update to all the listeners out there that have been listening for a while. The laundry's still not put away. Okay. Nothing has changed around here. Yes, I have upgraded to recording mostly, like I would say 90% of the time I'm recording in my office now, but every once in a while you get to the point where you just got to go in the closet and kind of hide away from everybody and record in here because it's what you got to do. But today we are talking about having more than one podcast. So if you don't know this, I have a daily podcast. It's called The Potty Report. Yes, it's silly. Yes, there's all kinds of story behind why I named this podcast. I think there's like 2 or 3 episodes about why I named the podcast The Potty Report. But there are a few reasons why I did this. Now, I really want to dive into why I did it first. Then we can dive into how I did it. And then we can talk about kind of the plans going forward of what I see for that podcast. So the first thing is why I did it. Crystal, you already have a podcast. You're putting out 2 episodes. We just hit the 1-year anniversary of the Profit Podcast, right? So if you didn't know this, the podcast was something totally different in April of 2019, and then we rebranded in May. And that's when we really adapted the Profit Podcast and everything that goes along with it. But I've been doing 2 episodes a week since May of 2019. Whew, that sounds crazy, you guys. But that's how we're at 152 episodes now. But the reason why I did a daily podcast is because I feel like those little short clips wouldn't work for this podcast. And let me explain, because I didn't want to change up the format to where you're getting on your podcast app or wherever you're listening to this, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there are like 17 episodes that I missed in 24 hours. Like, how did this happen? I didn't want it to be this content overload. And I also didn't want it to be like a change in the format, because that feels confusing. So this is what I was imagining. I was imagining having what if on Mondays I did a little 5-minute clip, 5-minute segment. Then on Tuesdays, I'd have a regular show. Then Wednesday, I do another 5-minute clip. And then on Thursday, I have a regular show or an interview. And then on Friday, I'd have another clip. Right? That just sounds so all over the place. And I don't want someone to get on their phone and be like, oh my gosh, what is this all related? Does it even make sense? And that was another thing, is having everything, all the content pieces tied together for that length of time, over the span of a week. And it just felt exhausting. It really did. It really did. And now you're like, wait, but you're doing this. But let me explain. The thought of having the different formats, switching back and forth within one podcast, felt exhausting and overwhelming. The reason why it's not actually exhausting and overwhelming is because it's all on one platform that I'm doing this. It's a separate platform. Okay. It is a totally different podcast. And it works. It works. All of those episodes, I think I'm up to more than 30 now. They have all been less than 5 minutes. Like, I am very diligent about watching the time whenever I'm recording, and they are all less than 5 minutes or less. Like, that was the guideline from the very beginning. I don't want it to go over, because I wanted them to be little daily bite-sized pieces that people could digest. And I'll just give you the real truth, right? Because I was playing around with this idea for a long time, and I don't know about y'all, but I have this idea, this Google Doc. Oh my gosh. I've mentioned some of the crazy ideas that I've had on there, and I've told my husband, which was a mistake, because he's like, what are you talking about? But I'm one of those people. I have a million ideas a day, and I have to just write them down and move on with it. Otherwise they will bug me to death. But one of them was experimenting with a daily podcast. And then I watched Gary Vee. I was watching a lot of his content, a lot of YouTube videos, and he just kept talking about the power of voice. And I'm like, well, I'm a podcaster. Okay. I've already box check, right. I'm putting out content that is all related to voice. But then I kept hearing him talking about utilizing the audio players like Alexa and Google and, all the different ones that are out there. He just kept saying, those are just going to be so big. They're going to be so big. Like, so much is going to happen with those in the next 5 to 10 years. And he kept saying it and kept saying it. And I was like, well, I don't really listen to podcasts on my Alexa or Google we don't have a Google. We have an Alexa. We have an Echo, one of those little dots. We have one of those in our bedroom, and we have an Alexa in our kitchen. And I kept thinking, well, because I don't listen to the whole flash briefing, right? Because maybe some of you listen to a daily flash briefing, like a news briefing from different news organizations or people that you follow, but that's not the way I consume content. I listen to podcasts, I put in my earbuds, my AirPods, and then I just go. That's how I've always consumed content. And it's always at certain times of the day. And it's not something that I've always done. But then I started thinking, I bet a lot of my listeners do that though. But are they like me, right? Are you like me where you put your phone in your pocket, I don't know about y'all. I love the ladies out there. If you have running pants, the ones that have the little slip pocket on the thigh, right, where you can just put your phone in and you can go. If you're running, working out, doing laundry, whatever, you can just put it in your pocket and go. I know guys are like, what are you talking about? But you guys, y'all have pockets, okay? You have pockets that can fit your phone. It's probably not that big a deal. But us ladies, we don't always have the good pockets. So anyway, I digress. On the yoga pants situation, but come on. You got to have the yoga pants that have the phone pocket, because it makes your life so much better. But, I am not a consumer that stays in one room in my house when I'm listening to something, or even I just don't. I'm in the kitchen, and then I'm making a snack for the kids, and then I'm, doing laundry when I do laundry, right? I'm cleaning, I'm organizing something. I'm moving. I'm a mover. I am not somebody that can sit still. And so whenever I think about somebody staying in one spot and listening to a podcast, I thought they need to be short. They need to be short podcasts. So that's really I know it was a long story, but that's really where this idea stemmed from, is but if I create a podcast that's super short, like a flash briefing, right? And I think flash briefings are actually even shorter than less than 5 minutes. But I thought this is a great way to kind of ease into the thought of having something that's daily content. And to be honest, I just thought what a cool opportunity to be in front of your audience and, make it fun. I'm all about experimenting and trying new things. And so I thought, why not? But it was on a Google Doc in my Google Drive. It was never intended that I was going to do this year. Then the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, I shouldn't do this. This is a terrible time to launch another podcast, right? Because listenership was really down in March. If you have already launched a podcast and you launched in March, like you may know that and you're like, I don't know what my stats mean. I don't know. Well, just know across the board, I heard like the Buzzsprout guys talk on Buzzcast and they were talking about across the board, listenership was way down in March as everyone adjusted to, their new routines and everything that they were doing. But thank goodness it's back up. Like I think it's like came back to normal. I don't know if it's at 100% normal, but it's definitely come back up. But I was like,
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I just got to get this out there. And at the same time, I was launching my membership, the Potty People. So shout out Potty People members. I know who you are. You know who you are. All right, that was kind of dorky, but I was thinking, oh my gosh, what if I launch this daily podcast? And so it airs Monday through Friday, and it's, like I said, 5 minutes or less. What if I put this out there and then I can show them all of the stats? Because if you don't know this already, most podcasters don't just share how many downloads they have. Yes, they may share when they hit a big milestone or sometimes share how many listeners they have or if they're on the charts, but most podcasters hold that pretty close to the chest. I almost feel like, and I was raised, you don't ask people how much money they make. You don't ask a woman how old she is kind of thing. Oh my gosh, I could tell y'all a super funny story. My husband will kill me. But I won't go into detail, but you don't ask a woman if she's pregnant. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Maybe we'll go into it another time, but it's just one of those things. You don't ask a podcaster how many downloads that they're getting on a regular basis, on a yearly basis, whatever. Everyone likes to be pretty vague about it because I think people are like, if I share this, are my numbers good? Are they okay? Is this where I'm supposed to be? I feel like the comparison trap really creeps in when you start sharing downloads and listeners and all that. And just a quick side note, I don't think that downloads alone or listeners are a measure of success for a podcast. I was actually doing a training recently in the Potty People, and I said that. I was like, you guys, there's so many variables that come into play whenever a podcast is out there. So many variables. Is it a super niche audience? What is the consumption rate of people that listen to the show? Are they engaged? Are they actually doing the calls to action that you have in your podcast? There's just so many factors that go into measuring the success of a podcast. So I wanted to create something for the Potty People where I could show them all of the numbers. And when I say that I mean all of the numbers. I routinely, I think at least on a weekly basis, I show them how the Potty Report is performing. I show them the episode downloads. I show them the overall downloads. I show them the listeners. I show them the locations. I show them everything. I actually showed them the entire setup process for the Potty Report. That was part of joining the membership. They get to see all the behind the scenes. And the reason why I do this, like I said, is because I want to be super transparent about what it's like to start a podcast and some of the emotional mindset stuff that you go through when you get started. Because honestly, I had gone through this way 2 years ago when I first started. So I forgot what some of it feels like when you're waiting. Because if you don't know this, if you haven't launched or you're just now launching and you're wondering when are your stats really going to show up? When are they going to kind of level off? And you see, how much, like what's a true number? Because their numbers will really spike when you launch, but then you're like, are they going to stay that way? So if you have a Buzzsprout account, you have to have 3 live episodes before the data starts showing up. Because, and I don't know on their end if there's a really specific reason why, but this is my opinion, is you just have to have more information. Like all the platforms need more information before they can make a decision on how many episode downloads you're actually getting, or how many downloads, how many listeners, all the things. And they don't want to do that if you only have 1 episode out there. It doesn't really make sense. So what I did is I showed the potty people, this is what it looks like. Here's how you do it. Here's what the first 30 days. And actually, if you want to go listen to the potty report, those are a few episodes. I give you like a glimpse into how the podcast was performing in the first few weeks. I haven't done another one of those in a while. But that's one of the main reasons why I did it. It's another reason is I wanted to show and be very transparent about the podcast numbers. And I don't think it would have been fair to give them access to the Profit podcast stats because they're not really comparable. If you're just showing up, if you're just starting, I've been doing this for 2 years. We're 152 episodes in, and sharing those numbers just doesn't make sense because it's not the same. Like your numbers will always be different than mine. My numbers will always reflect my audience and not someone else's audience. And also, I really just wanted to show the mindset of the reason why I create content the way that I do based on my data. And that is totally different for this podcast than it is for the other podcast. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Because whenever I create content, I do go into my stats and I see what's performing better. And with the other podcast, it is a lot more kind of all over the place. That's intentional. So if you listen to it and you're like, man, she's really, it's because I'm still trying to figure out the format that I want to use. This podcast, I've got it honed in. I got it honed in as far as, when I'm going to have guests on, when I'm going to have just different subjects, different topics. Those are based on either a promotion that I'm doing or just based around a lot of different things. My personal schedule, like we have summer coming up. So I have to be very intentional about what I do when, because summertime's coming. I don't want to be, stuck in the studio, quote unquote, my closet surrounded by laundry. That is what we're calling the studio. I don't want to be stuck in here all summer, just recording. So, all of that to say that those are some of the reasons why I started this podcast. Now, how I actually did it was a matter of I just added another account within my Buzzsprout account. So it's not like I went and got a new setup or anything new. I just added a new account or a new podcast within my same account. Sorry, I think I said that wrong. So under one account that I have in Buzzsprout, I added a brand new podcast, and you can do that very easily. If you already have a podcast, you just go and it's like add new, and they make sure that you understand that if you add a new one, you're put on a different billing plan for this new podcast. Like it's not just something you can tack on to another plan. You will have to pay to have another podcast. So they make that very clear. And I think that they even have like an option there. Like if you just want to add a new episode, like this is what you're looking for, but this is actually creating a brand new podcast, picking a plan and all the things. So that's how I did it. I went into Buzzsprout, added it, and it's the same process for the Profit podcast as it is for the Potty Report. The only real difference between the two is this is episodes come out every Tuesday and Thursday for this podcast, and over there they come out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Monday through Friday. That's what I meant. And so that's the difference. So I see different statistics over on that podcast than I do for this podcast for many reasons. I can tell my listeners really tune in on Thursdays for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they listen to this podcast as well. And, they just want to listen to all of them on a Thursday, like every single one. That's a lot. That's a lot of Crystal. If you're listening, if that's you, that is a lot of podcasting. That's a lot of listening to me talk a bunch of podcast nonsense for a long time. But that's another thing is on that podcast, we were chatting about the formatting. I do a lot of just not ranting. I don't want to call it rants because I feel like that's a negative connotation if you were thinking about checking it out and then you're like, oh, she's just complaining. I don't want to go listen to it. But I do a lot more opinion on that podcast than I do here because I feel like if you're showing up listening here, I want you to walk away with something tangible that you can either implement, go do, go research, or go do something once you listen to this, whether you're inspired, motivated, energized, whatever. I want you to walk away from this podcast with something to do, like an action item to help move your podcast journey forward. That podcast is more like if we were just sitting down having coffee and you wanted my opinion, like my honest opinion, because that's where like the rant part comes in. Because I feel like I get a little bit more real about, like one of them is stop freaking interrupting people or stop interrupting people during an interview. I don't know what it was, but I just I went off a little bit on that one, but it's just true. It's more opinion. Whereas here, I want to keep this podcast grounded in teaching, instruction, because that's what y'all came here for, right? Like you're here to listen, to figure out how to have a better podcast. And we're going to leave the opinions on that one. Don't get me wrong. We still got lots of opinions here, lots of funny stories that we got to share. But I don't want this podcast to just be like just me just talking. And sometimes that's what the Potty Report is me just talking. There's some teaching, but I've given a lot of resources. For example, I did a whole week of just resources and equipment and software that I've been obsessed with lately. So you should go check that out. And I'll link to all of this in the show notes. So you can figure out these specific episodes that I'm talking about. You can go check out the format and see everything that is behind the Potty Report. But really, at the end of the day, I did it as an experiment, and that's still what it is. I am loving the response I'm getting from the members in the Potty People community because they're just like, oh, I feel like they can, now that they can see it, especially there's been, I would say a good majority of the group still hasn't launched a podcast. They're in that stage of figuring it out and making it happen. But a lot of them are just grateful to see, oh, this is what it will look like, or this is what I can expect. It's almost like being able to see the traffic coming at you and not feeling like you're getting blindsided, right? Like you know what's ahead and you know, okay, I need a plan for this. I need to make sure I'm watching out for that. So while I love sharing successes and celebrating wins and people launching and doing all the things, I think that where people really need help, and this is me projecting because this is where I really needed help podcasting, was just understanding some of the logistics that make a successful podcast and make you keep going. And you guys, I don't know if you missed the Podcaster's Burnout Masterclass that I did, but man, burnout's real. It's a real thing. And it's something that I never want any podcaster to quit just because it got too hard or it was too much work. I am here to hopefully give you some energy and give you some insight and give you some motivation to keep podcasting because it's so much fun. It's so much fun. And maybe you don't share that same enthusiasm, and that's okay. But I hope that one day you will. I hope that one day you are so obsessed with learning more about your audience and taking risks, like experimenting, like doing something crazy just because it sounds fun. And that's one of the other reasons why I did it. I'm like, I don't even know if this daily podcast is going to work. It's probably going to be terrible, but why not? I already know how to do it. Let's just give it a shot. So I'm going to wrap up with, if you are already podcasting and you're wondering, should I create another podcast? I'm going to give you 3 tips. 1, look at the subject matter of your current podcast. If it is totally different in style, or the audience is a little bit different, or you just think, I just don't know if it's going to fit my format, it's probably a good, I would say yes. It's probably not a bad thing to explore having a separate podcast. The second is, do you actually have time? Do you have time to create content for another platform? Really evaluate. Are you already getting all the stuff done you need to get done for your podcast? Are you marketing it? Are you really engaging with your audience? Are you growing it? All the things. And the third thing is, do you have the bandwidth? And I know time and bandwidth can kind of seem like the same thing, but I really want you to hone in on, is this going to stress you out? Because time is one thing, you could have all the time in the world, but is it going to stress you out to have another podcast? Because that was another reason that I drew the line in the sand, and these are going to be 5 minutes or less. Because in my mind, I thought I can absolutely sit down for 25 minutes, right? Because if it's 5 minutes or less over 5 days a week, that's roughly 25 to 30 minutes. I could record an entire week worth of content in 30 minutes. That excited me. That actually made me really happy, because I was like, I can absolutely do this. But if you don't have that bandwidth, you don't need to do it. You don't need to do it. I think that you should wait until you feel more stable, more just like your feet are planted on the ground with your current podcast before you decide to do another one. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if this is your first time tuning in, I would love for you to subscribe to the show and hear some of the other fun things that we have coming up. I have some great interviews that I've been doing, and I'm just so dang excited to share them with you. We actually did a Facebook Live interview recently that is going to air towards the end of May. And it was in our private Facebook group for this community. So, and it's totally free. If you haven't joined, it's the Profit Podcast online community. And we're going to link to that in the show notes so you can go check it out. But I think I'm going to start doing that a lot more. I really like the vibe of interviewing and being able to interact with comments. So that was fun. There were some people watching us, and we were able to interact with, answer questions right there on the spot. So I think I'm going to start doing some of those in the future with guests, because it was just so much fun. And I think I have one interview in particular that I'm really thinking about doing, because they're just going to be just crazy. I love this person so much. They're going to be so much fun. So I'm thinking about doing it. We'll keep it on the DL until then. But make sure you go to crystalprofit.com/episode 152 for today's show notes and all the links that we mentioned today, and check out the Potty Report. Go check it out. I would love it if you would subscribe to that show and leave us a review, just because, you guys, if you want some podcasting nonsense, that's really where you're going to find it. I mean, we have a little bit here. We like to keep it, more teachable and serious. Not really. Please don't ever call this podcast serious. I don't call this podcast serious, but as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, there's shenanigans. That is the S word you were looking for, not serious. Shenanigans is the correct word. But that's all I have for you today. So go check out the show notes, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.
Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.